All right, what's up, everyone? I'm JaVonni Brustow, and this is season 3 of the PopGlitz Podcast. I'm here today with Aaron Myers. He's a friend of mine, jazz singer, and he's actually one of the inspirations for creating PopGlitz. I remember we had a meeting some years ago, and I just remember going home and actually starting that very evening. So, Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you? Doing
I'm
very
doing
well.
great. And for your titles, jazz singer, composer, musician, author. I think I get everything journalist in there as well.
Uh, a little bit of what it takes to get through the day, I suppose. Yes, yes. Board member, music, yeah, all those things. Comedian, actor, all that good stuff.
Yes. So you just recently wrote oh Lord, we'll be having
That's right.
dropping things. So you just recently wrote a book. Was this your first one?
First one published, second written. I have another book that should be
Okay.
coming out next year. That was completed last year, actually. Um, Called "By the Way: Tall Tales and Lessons Learned," and just certain lessons learned from a unique childhood, I would say. That's not so unique once you talk to a lot of other people. I'm just in a unique position to tell it, I suppose. So,
Okay.
yeah,
And now
that
this
mhm.
title, I believe this was this white people
White people
talking
talking to white
to
people.
white
Yes.
people? And so,
Uh-huh.
given the way that 2020 has been, I have an idea of what the inspiration might have been, but
Well,
tell us how.
actually, the book came along. Um, you know, to many people, the George Floyd situation. When I say it's situation, that he deals with the murder and then also everything that kind of came up around that. Um, it's not the first time for me. I grew up with a very similar situation happening when in the early '90s, and
Yeah,
I this George Floyd thing when it happened. Um, it was just something that I kind of was just I didn't know what else could be done as far as like we've called it criminal justice reform. We've called it
right.
comprehensive police reform. We've marched in the streets before. We've had come to Jesus meetings. We've had coalitions. We've had different boards created. And
Right.
I said on my Facebook, I said, I wish my white friends would just talk to each other and just kind of figure this thing out because there's not really much more that a person of color could say or anyone from a marginalized population could say since we're not the perpetrators of
Right.
this particular injustice. People talk about black on black crime, but we have to also talk about white on white crime. Like, crime happens usually with
Right.
people who live in proximity to one to the other. And so I had a woman
That
who
does exist. We
messaged
do
me.
tend to forget talking about that.
Yeah, well, people, I mean, crime happens, and usually a if you have a neighborhood of predominantly African American people, uh, crimes of all fashion will happen black on black. Just as when
Right.
you have neighborhoods of predominantly white people, crimes happen and they're white on white. Or same thing in the Native American community or
Right.
Latinx community. And so it's always somewhat to me a little misnomer to say, well, what about the black on black crime? Well, that's crime. There's no such thing as black on crime is crime, and usually they happen in proximity of people who live
Yeah.
around each other. So how do we fix that community? But when
Right.
it comes specifically to people in which we put trust in, as far as our police officers and people of that nature, when we look at that, and that we in part of our tax dollars pay their salaries and pay for their training and this, that, and
Right.
the other. I wanted to know exactly, well, what can we do this, and it's not really of those people who they are trying to quote unquote police to solve this. It's their issue, but also there was something more embedded. So this
Yeah.
white lady messaged me, And she said, Aaron, and she's a former dean of a college, and she said, Aaron, I don't consider myself racist. I don't consider myself, this, that, and the other. But I realize that I have been too silent, but I don't know how to engage in the conversation. And so what I did, I got on Zoom with 7 white ladies, all from different places, and we started with 2 questions, and I wanted just to see how the conversation went. And it really looked and it sounded as if people had not been A, listened to, but then B, the assumption of how they understood race was made not based on how they were informed about race. And those conversations usually only happened in retaliation to injustice or a problem versus an intentional conversation with people who already have faith and currency with each other. And so it's my idea and my thought is that people would go at this from an intentional conversation standpoint with facts, with proper definitions, and not from a place of judgment, understanding that one conversation wouldn't solve anything or everything, but knowing that if a brother and sister sit down with each other to have a conversation to understand how could we defuse and root out systemic racism within our friend group, within our family, within our network. Just me and you. How can I help you be better? How can you help me to be better? People who did the exercise, there was a set of twins who were informed about race differently. There's a friend, some friends have been friends for over 50 years. And the woman told me she thought she learned more about her friend that she's had in 50 years from this conversation that she had learned in 50 years. This lady in her 70s states that this is the first time that she actually found herself actively listening, because usually we're actively ready to respond. And so we talk about listening skills, we talk about all that good stuff. And it is white people talking to white people, because what I've heard in narratives usually comes around holidays, where I hear a lot of white people who just don't want to go home for the holidays. They have to talk to their racist uncle, their prejudiced, this, that, and the other. And they have the option of not speaking to these people all year, except for when they're forced to come together around the holidays. However, a person of color, a marginalized person, meets the worst of these people. We don't have the option of not running into them. And when we do run into them, we run into the worst example of who they are. And then at that time, it costs us our lives. That's what's in jeopardy. So I argue, do not distance yourself from that prejudiced or bigoted family member. You should go to them, reach out to them, and then learn how they were informed about their tolerance, their feelings about race, and then express to them how you've been informed, and then how you two could see each other in more human ways, and how you could be the best version of yourselves. Yeah.
All that is just a conversation. I feel like you're confirming a lot of what I've been doing politically. Like I was talking to someone yesterday. I just met with our police chief, and I said that there's a reason why I come to these meetings and I tend to hang around with people the last ones to leave, because I'm talking to everyone just so I can have an idea of both what's going on, where people are coming from. And this is Virginia, near Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. And so racial tensions can be, quite thick here. It's not what I'm used to. And, instead of distancing myself from, a whole slew of people, I have tried to engage in conversation, do my studying, to follow up with some people, just to, both understand their perspective and, just to have that type of dialogue, because some people just don't know. And it goes both ways, because
well,
again,
I think it's important. I think it's important for people to realize that, the term racist is always thrown around, and racism has to imply a level of power. I think that we have to understand. And then you also hear people say, well, Black people can be racist too. Well, that's not really the case. Black people, all people of all colors, could be prejudiced or bigoted, have bigotry. They can hold a bias. They can hold a bigotry. They can express bigotry. They can express prejudice. Racism comes into play when your color perhaps may be attached to a level of privilege, and where that your prejudice can actually impact the hiring practices of someone, the livelihood of someone else, the safety of your neighbor. So that if you are have a bigoted or prejudiced or biased standpoint, and when you call 911 and your voice now is elevated and you're expressing a different level of anxiety or distress that is not reflective of what's actually going on, that then puts the person of color in jeopardy. Or when you're in the boardroom and you're doing your interviews, and then you offer a different level of questioning to the person of color who is interviewing for said position, or when you decide that you look strictly at the statistics when you're making votes, and you're like, well, it's okay that this bill will negatively impact this small percentage of people, without understanding what that
Hit the
small
nail on the
percentage
head
of
there.
people looks like, you know? So I think that's when bigotry and prejudice turns into racism. And the racists are those people who are actually actively in those positions, allowing their prejudice and their bigotry to influence their power. And then that power is then yielded up, or wielded, that is, upon people of color. And then when you're at your job, when you just got this raise and you're now the director, well, you're not the CEO. And there's a reason why you look at most boardrooms of companies and you don't see the diversity that you want to see there. There's a reason why when you're going to get your application for a loan at the bank to start that business or whatever, that's why your lending capital is not the same for people of color. That's why real estate options, when you're selling your real estate, is not the same for other people. You're not going to get the same value for your home as if the same home was being sold by someone who was white. I think we have to look at these biases, but as a person of color, people of color have examined, and we know more about white people than they ever would know about us, because just as in any predator-prey situation, it's important for the prey to know where the predator is, what their tendencies are, where they tend to get water, where they tend to hunt, when they're not hunting, when they're resting, when they're okay, when they're agitated, this, that, and the other. It's amazing. I think of my grandmother, who was a domestic, and she would know, she could tell in an instant when so-and-so was not in a good mood, or when today's going to be a hard day because so-and-so. I mean, all this mental figuring out, and it's a survival skill that African Americans and people of color have had to adopt, versus just the living skills that non-minorities have had to deal with, which is what we're asking for is the privilege of being able to live, not to survive. You know, and so when we're looking for the same, we're not asking for any of white people's or the majority the privilege to be taken away from them. We're asking for those same privileges to be extended, which is an important thing. But I don't have any power in that. Mm-hmm.
Right. I had a question. I know that you had worked on slightly unrelated, pandemic relief for artists in the district.
Yeah.
But did you also work on any type of legislation around this as far as criminal
Yes.
justice reform? Okay.
Oh, yes.
I thought that I'd heard that.
Yeah, we had a friend of mine who he just won his ANC commission. This is a neighborhood non-paid elected position here in Washington.
Described it exactly as I do.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a friend of mine, and when this George Floyd thing happened, he called me and he said, I'm a white guy, but I want to talk about this with someone, and I wanted to would you help me? I have an idea. And so we talked things through, and we came up with the CPR Act. And we came up with this around the same time as the George Floyd thing was going through
What
Congress. Comprehensive Police Reform.
Okay.
Comprehensive Police Reform Act. And basically what we did, we listened to what a lot of the protesters were requesting when it came to defund the police and things of that nature. And we were able to put them through in priority and kind of lay them out in a way where it would be digestible, made sense. And a lot of it, I will say, is in the George Floyd Act. I actually was on the phone with Sheila Jackson Lee's aide, crying, basically, trying to get them just to review it and see what we can do, but they're like, listen, we're pushing through this act, and luckily, there's a lot of congruency there.
Okay.
But we put that up so that the conversation could happen. It was around the time when people were stating, well, defund the police is a bad, it's non-sellable. You can't use that term. That term is not going to be helpful. And what they were saying was that it's not going to be helpful to Southern or small town or smaller community white people who you want to be on your side against this situation. But
Mm-hmm.
defund the police is exactly what you want to happen. Your police force and your peacekeepers are the last and first line of defense. They're the last line of defense when all the other social norms have broken down, and they're the first line of defense to be in action so that it will not disrupt anything else. And so
Very
if
good
you have
point.
a
We had this
community.
exact same discussion with my police chief yesterday.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, when you look at how a community is laid out in general, you want to make sure that if you have a community that food is a necessity, so that the places where grocery stores and places where you get fresh food and safe food and healthy food is not done by popularity or income, but based on population, so that it's evenly dispersed, so everyone has equal opportunity and equal access to healthy food. Once you've done that, you must look at, well, okay, what about homes? Well, the neighborhoods and multifamily living spaces must be laid out not according to wealth or class, but laid out according to population. So everyone has access to a safe space to lay their head or whatever. You look at jobs. A lot of times we look at communities working to the luxury, people would say, of walking to work safely, to a job that pays them a living wage so that they can actually pay for that said home in the community. That's a big thing. That's a huge thing. Having a neighborhood where you have the option of having, okay, a public school that's well funded so that it's fully funded with fully funding arts programs. If you have a fully funded arts program, programs in your schools, you have a fully funded school, because arts do raise up the test scores and everything else of all the other disciplines that you teach in school. Once you have those
And
things offered,
now
and you have.
I'll add
Mhm.
when you mentioned, sorry, and forgive me, there's like the lag is
That's fine.
pretty late. But there is one thing that I'll give credit to, and I have a political show and I feel like I'm going off in that direction. But one thing that I give credit to DC's council member, former one, Tommy Wells, about the livable, walkable communities, as you said, things that it's considered a luxury to be able to walk to work, to the grocery store, things like that. But that was once a thing, probably about 5 decades ago. And in the definition of a healthy neighborhood, healthy and safe, and most importantly, a viable neighborhood, is to be able to walk to these things,
Oh, and they
to
were
have
they were
more of a
there.
sense of community.
They were
And
there.
the
They were
further that
also
we've gotten,
segregated.
mhm,
And so
yeah,
they were safe because they were segregated. So African Americans got to see, this is a very interesting thing, about 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And in my case, I will say, growing up in an all African American community in town, you went, and the shop owners that you saw were Black. The teachers that you saw were Black. The undertaker was Black. The hustler was Black. But everybody was African American, in the sense that when you did deal with white people, it was on a limited basis, and rules were laid out to know how this is going to happen. Well, now that is broken down. Now we're integrated. We're all supposed to be somewhat together, and things are much better than they. And you have to, from when look at the advantages and the options that we have in this day and time. They are great in comparison to what our grandparents would have had to deal with.
right.
However, being able to walk to work, being able to walk to school, walk to the park, and walk to a job that pays a good wage, getting food to the grocery store that you can afford, to a school that is actually educating in a good way, to a home that is safe. When you have those things, crime is relatively low. And a lot of the people in a lot of the communities that have been really talking against, I go back to my hometown, and my sister actually and I were talking about, defund the police, and she was like, I don't like it. I think that's just a distraction. And I stopped her. I said, well, how in the world are you going to tell me about you don't like defund the police, but in your town there's only 2 police officers? I mean, that's the epitome of defunded police. You have police that will be adequate to what you need for your small town. You have a town of a little under 2,000 people, yet you only have 2 or 3 police officers, and they're not even on duty at the same time. And so that's a reality.
And look, I I think that you had a slogan of, I think it was fund the arts, defund the
Yeah,
police.
defund the police and refund the arts, asking for any money that would be netted from actually investing in healthy neighborhoods and this, that, and the other, would then be reinvested in making sure schools had fully funded arts programs. I mean, fully funded arts programs are not just something that is optional. Not everybody has the talent or has the opportunity, the want, the desire to be musical in any way or to be artsy in any way. Uh, but when you have fully funded programs in schools and their access is given to students as early as elementary school, the option is put on the table, and then a level of understanding is put on the table. When I travel outside of this country, and when I go to a place, when I went to Russia, speaking of all places, going to Russia as a jazz artist was amazing, because you would think that the audiences would reflect similar audiences that you see here in the United States, older, mostly college people, that kind of thing. Older Black, white people, the academy, that kind of thing. But no, going to Russia showed me what could happen when art is really an emphasis and put in as an option in elementary school, starting elementary, middle school, and high school. Because I'm looking at audiences of high schoolers, college people who are just like, they're out ready to, like, they're going to the club, coming to my show because they can actually understand the music and appreciate the artistry.
Interesting. And I'll add for everyone, I had this on, my to-do list to cover later, but yeah, Aaron was in Russia for how long was that? First I
Six
looked and
weeks.
I saw you were 6 weeks. Yes, first I saw a performance or two, and I didn't really get a chance to talk to you about it. And I said, oh, well, it apparently looks like he's moved there because you were there
No,
for quite some time.
6 weeks. I did
So that
24
was very good.
shows in 20 different cities, 19
And
flights in
how
six
did
weeks.
that? Well, before I ask, how did that go? I would add, as far as music education in school, I was watching a documentary about the city of Detroit, and how one of the public school teachers said that for those who think that funding music education is, ridiculous and just, something extra to do, she said, well, imagine all of the scholarships that students could get and how they could possibly, pull them out of poverty. And it was probably one of the first times I'd ever thought about that. We're trying to solve this problem from all angles, and that definitely is one of them.
Yes, it is. And I think that it's an angle that not only, is a space of, well, scholarships and even opportunities to go to college and to have exposure to higher education and different opportunities, but it's a different place and different space in which you can emote. It's an option to a gun.
Yeah.
It's an option to drugs. It's an option to this, that, and the other.
Coping
I mean,
skills are,
yes,
are a
exactly.
big deal, and especially inside of urban communities. And that's one way to deal with problems. Some people don't know how to express what they're dealing with every day. And, instead of going outside and, punching a neighbor in the face, possibly, practicing an instrument might help.
Yes, yes, absolutely, 100%.
And how did this tour in Russia come about? That's what I've been dying to ask you.
Well, I had been asked to go different places for years. I had not done so. I had not taken advantage of the opportunity. Sharon Clark Melva had gone to Russia. Laura Williams had gone, and Steve Washington, all from here, had gone to Russia and seemed to have had a wonderful time. Elijah Balbin. I mean, people were going and were actually coming back, not just raving about it, but actually, understanding that this is a legit situation where a country that you would not imagine or think would appreciate music or jazz or Americanism at all. So I was
Right.
I was approached. They hit me up on Facebook. I'm like, hey, you were referred.
Okay.
Would you like to, are you considering it? I was like, is this a scam? I don't want to
Started
deal
on
with a scam.
Facebook.
but I had been asked before by a different group, and so I decided to take Sergey up on this offer. I said, I'll do this. I'll give it a try. And so I went, and I'm better for it. I tell you, I'm not one who likes flying. I don't like flying, actually. And I did 19 flights in that 6-week period. And I learned, if I learned anything, I would say that I learned that this music is far from dead, and it is very much so appreciated. And the influence that this music has had, not just on American music here, here in the States, but the influence it's had on culture around the world and what it really means to different populations. I was in Lithuania, and simply just playing in a coffee shop. I was just going back to my hotel, and the girl was playing and singing, and I was singing. I sung with her a little bit. And, there's a line outside the door of people who just are hungry for this, but what it symbolizes and it means to other populations, it's something that we in America, we take for granted to a degree.
Right. Yeah, so that's amazing. And so, you have this new book on race relations. You have toured in Russia. And I know that you were, what is the name of the jazz foundation that you
The Capitol Hill
started?
Jazz Foundation.
Yes. And
Capitol
so I
Hill
think
Jazz
that you all are
Foundation.
you all are about a year or so into that now.
3 or 4.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I've been away from the city for what is this now going on 3 years, so my timing's a little bit off.
Right.
But and I believe part of the purpose of that was to help with saving jazz within the city, correct?
Well, trying to fill a certain gap. Jazz is deeply inbred in Washington, deep embedded in Washington.
It
So
absolutely is.
it did not need to be saved, but I can tell you that we were not using, and we did not have I would say a viable relationship with all of the stakeholders from a legislative standpoint,
Okay.
and even from an agency standpoint, that could actually help jazz thrive to its actual, its capacity. The maximum capacity, at least here in this city. And so we tried our best, first of all, we did a great listening tour, I guess you could say, to understand what was going on, some of the problems we were having, not just with jazz, but with entertainment in general, some of the deficits that were there. And our goal was to, as a foundation, to offer some financial support and resources to be a bridge where we could during this pandemic. We were probably the first to launch relief micro grants for artists. We did 2 rounds, over 80 artists here in Washington, D.C. We every Monday and Thursday, twice weekly, I hold a DMV Music Stakeholders Call, where we've been instrumental on getting certain initiatives passed through the council and through the mayor's office that would help artists and help venues. I did recently write the Music Venue Relief Act to try to help get some money and some help for artists. The mayor then announced the Bridge Fund, and we're still advocating on behalf of artists and venues that a sustainable model would be created as an incentive for venues to stay open. It's hard to believe that venues that are closed right now are still paying fixed costs as low as $10,000 up to $24,000, $30,000 a month. Well, if you've been closed for 6 months and you're paying $10,000 a month in fixed costs, that $60,000 lost without any revenue in sight, knowing that this industry was the first to close, will be the last to open. And so you're asking people to enter a new.
Just look at like the plight of the what's the theater in LaJoy Park? I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of it.
The theater?
Somewhere around North Capitol. Yeah, somewhere around North Capitol and W Street.
Oh, you're talking about the Capitol Fringe?
No. It was a theater that was just reopened a couple years ago that had been closed for a few decades. I can't think of it. It's a big like yellow
The Howard
20s
Theater.
era theater. Howard Theater. Sorry.
Yes.
And just did that recently close again? I could be
Well,
wrong on the story.
all theaters are closed. I don't think the Howard Theater closed for good. They may have, and I may not be aware of it. But
Okay. I mean, I know that they've
I
been, teetering on the edge of it. I mean, I watched them
they had
renovate
for
it.
the last 2 or 3 years they had been, and that's primarily because they were not booked from within the city. Their bookings were happening outside of Washington. It's very difficult. It's a lot of
Oh,
theaters.
I've been talking about the theater a lot, and I didn't know that.
Yeah,
So I
there's a
learned
lot. A
something
lot
new.
of theaters fall victim mostly because the people who book them are not booking based upon what they know is hot for this area. They are booking
Hmm.
according to their own tour availability. So we got these people who want to, we can place here, 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 and this person hit me up. Let's put them there. This, that, and the third. And that person may not have an audience here, or even if they don't have an
I
audience
see.
here, they may require two opening acts to help them get the room full to make sure the show is
Right.
viable. But when you have a person who is booking here and putting shows on the stage without understanding what the pulse of the city is, then that is a recipe
Hmm.
for disaster. I know 2 or 3
I
different
see.
general managers as they've come and gone, who have tried their very best, their level best, given the circumstances that they were given and handed. And so
Right.
I know Sandra Butler Truesdale has done a great deal trying to speak to those who are in control or in charge to make sure that DC artists are considered, because they are the people who you're going to have to use to help fill those rooms when you cannot fill them
Right.
on your own.
Right. And so I'll add, aside from your work with trying to help the jazz community in DC, that one thing, usually I'll say that there's only a couple people that I call whenever I want to have some type of sane political advice or just sane community advice. And that would be you. And I think you know of our other friend, Miss Ann
Right,
Cassidy.
right.
And especially being down here. So with that being said, I know we have discussed this years ago, I believe, but is there any chance of Aaron Myers running for office in DC?
Oh, well,
Things change. I just thought I
there
would
had been
ask.
some talk. Yeah, there had been some talk. Um, I did toy with the idea of doing an exploratory committee for council. Um, but I'm still praying on it and thinking about it. I am a musician for a reason. I do love music. I do love my art,
Right.
and I do. There are some things I would love to accomplish there first before I would go into a
Right.
full-fledged political thing. I've often understood that in my position, the most I would have to disappoint is an audience or a band. When you're running for office, you have the lives and the livelihoods of your constituents um, really at the power of your pen, and the power of your compromising skills, or your
At least you
legislative.
think of that because
Yeah.
many people running for office and who sit in office don't
Oh
actually
yes.
consider that they're
Yeah.
dealing with people's lives.
Yes,
So,
and their livelihoods. You look. I mean, I shudder to think um, what could have happened if we had completely um, um, cold-hearted people who were in office during this particular time in Washington.
yeah,
When we are having a vacuum of leadership on the federal level when it comes to coordinating how aid and relief is distributed, and the direction that municipalities and states were to take. This is one moment where republicanism would have had to evolve in a sense, small government, and understanding the role of a centralized government and what it needed to do, and the allowances you would need to grant a centralized government to actually to coordinate a type of relief and mitigation strategy and plan, such as what was needed to face this one. We failed at this 100 years ago, but the only excuse we had was that we were in the middle of a world war, and so that was that excuse at that particular time. So when I have been asked, and I've been asked since the election. Ironically, I've been asked on 4 different occasions, and I told the last person that I would do an exploratory committee to see what it would look like. But more than likely, I will stick with music until an opportunity would present itself.
Right. One of the reasons why I asked is just that, there are not many people in the local government, and not just in DC, but in that area that have any type of a music background or connection. I mean, the only couple people that come to mind would be Ron Moten and H.E.R. Abraham when they were running for council, both having a go-go background. And then the only type of music legislation that I can really think of in recent history would be my former council member in PG County, Maryland, Karen Tolles, I think, on her War Against Go-Go, So just having someone with some type of, knowledge of, that side of the city would be helpful. And I mean, I remember just even watching conservative news when the pandemic started and seeing the Kennedy Center kind of being mocked for getting, for getting funding, and then me watching just the whole conversation about how, they employ so many people, etc. And of course, as usual, you all don't necessarily know how the funding for this location works anyway.
Right.
So just saying, you would be bringing a different perspective. So I thought about it. That's why I thought of it. Now, otherwise, aside from writing the book, how have you survived 2020?
I'm alive. I do have antibodies, so I was sick earlier on. There's 2.
Okay,
I didn't have my antibody test until July when it was available and more reliable. And so there are 2 times in this year, around March and once in February, that I can point to where I can say that I know that I was sick and that I did not feel well, And so I know I've survived it. I had a family member that did not, though. My family member who actually flew here and was at my last show before I left for Russia. Yes. And so my cousin Linda Faye, and so she did not make it. Excuse me. And so it is excuse me. It is it's difficult to have known not only family members. I've had other family members who've been sick with it. Dear friend, brother Jeff Corey, who's also a musician, he's in ICU now. He was just put there, I think, yesterday. And knowing that there are friends that I grew up with and faces I grew up with seeing that we'll never see again because of this virus. And so 2020 has been, I don't think we can ask really the question of, how we're surviving, because we're all waiting to get on the other side of it, really. I can't complain, only because I have a roof over my head. I have options for food. I don't have much money coming in as far as what I'm traditionally used to. Usually at this time, I'd be gearing up for Christmas gigs and making a good a killing doing that kind of thing. That's not happening. Usually would be gearing up for inauguration gigs and New Year's Eve gigs. That won't be happening in the same way either. And then after that, you go with Valentine's Day. We don't know if that's going to be happening the same way either. So the spaces in which you would usually be trying to store up your nuts, gather your nuts so you can survive and kind of last until the summer and the festival season starts. That's not happened the same way this year, but it's okay because we're here to fight. We're alive to figure out a particular solution. I know that my next album, I kind of did a cost estimate of it about $12,000. And I'm just sitting there like, well, goodness gracious, where am I going to come up with $12,000 to make this thing happen? And so I think that's one of my chief focuses, so I can get this next project out. During the pandemic, I did become a voting member for the Recording Academy for the Grammys. So that's a wonderful thing to have happened.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So my goal is to, represent the organization well by putting out a good product.
Right.
So if anybody wants to donate toward a project, let me know, because I have one for you.
Okay,
but
you hear that, people?
outside of that, yeah, exactly. But outside of that, I've been doing the best that I can.
Yes, which is, all that we can ask, given this type of insane year. As I said, I did sort of presumptively ask that question. We've got a couple weeks left. Hopefully we'll all still be around to tell this January the 1st. Last week before you go, you've been performing since you were 3. And I know that you worked with many people. You're still the minister. Are you still minister of music?
10 years, yeah. 10 years, be 11 years next
Okay,
year, yeah.
oh wow. 11 years. I feel like I remember having a conversation with you when you hadn't long started that. I said I'm going to start. I'm going to stop saying that things were 10 years ago because I feel like making me feel old. And
Yeah, it makes me feel a
you
little
are the
old, but it's
resident
all right.
musician for Mr. Henry's.
Yes,
Right, it's
yes.
okay. Mr. Henry's
Still
on
there,
Capitol Hill,
still
right?
there. A
How
lot of
long has
people will
that
know
been?
Mr. Henry's as being where Roberta Flack started on here in Washington, D.C. And I've now been there since the end of 2015, since
Okay.
June or July of 2015. It was in 2015 when the Black Fox closed. And so I've been there, I guess, 5 years.
Oh, that's right. Didn't you come from the Black Box before that?
Exactly right. That's exactly correct.
Okay, your memory's serving me pretty well. So, and again, you've got a nice long musical resume. If there's anyone that you could work with at this point in time, that you haven't already, who would it be?
Oh gosh. Okay, I'm gonna give you a couple of names here. I would love to do a project with
Okay.
Aaron Deal. He's a pianist that's fantastic. I would love to do some type of work with Jazzmeia Horn, because Jazzmeia has a voice that is from heaven, in my opinion. I love her when it comes into my genre of jazz. Of course, I've always wanted to do some type of work with Kurt Elling, just a fun stage work, vocal wise, back and forward from a broader spectrum as far as music is concerned. Um, I'd love to work with John Legend. I would love to do some work with him and Aloe Black. I love both of them a great deal.
Okay.
Gospel wise, I'd always wanted to have a good old fashioned fun time with John P. Key, if possible. You know what I mean? And then
One
I
of my
guess
first
from
albums I bought ever was a John P. Key album. I think one of the first 5.
oh yeah, and then from a pop standpoint, uh, I would not mind. Well, I don't know if it's pop or R&B. Her is her name. Her H.E.R. I like
Hmm.
what she
Yeah.
does, and if we ever did some work together, that would be
Okay.
fantastic. And just from a rap standpoint, I wouldn't mind working with The Weeknd. You know, and so that's just from
Okay.
people who I would love to work with. It would be those just going just through the gamut of people I listen to and I've heard and wouldn't mind working with.
Okay. Well, I love that you covered all the genres there of what you wanted to do.
I've always,
And I
what
know.
I've wanted to do. I've wanted to have put out, do some jazz or put out an album. I've always wanted to do a duet with Felicia Rashad. I've always wanted to do a duet with Felicia Rashad. I love her
Okay.
voice. I've always loved her voice, and I feel like when
Yes,
it
that'd be
comes to
beautiful.
jazz, she could really probably tear it up in a beautiful way. I had wanted to work with Diane Carroll before she died, and her her niece Debbie Joyce came to one of my shows here in Washington, and I even let her sing. Beautiful voice.
Oh,
Not Diane Carroll. She's a niece of Nancy Wilson, and so before Nancy Wilson
okay.
died, and I wanted to work with her, but I
I
also
was
wanted to work
going
with
to
Diane
say
Carroll.
Diane Carroll is still here, right?
No, Diane Carroll left us.
Please tell me I'm wrong. How long ago was this?
I
I'm
think she died
sorry.
2 years ago, 2 years or maybe last year. Diane Carroll and
Okay, so it's not
Nancy
been that long
Wilson.
ago. Okay.
No, 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 no. I wanted to work with both of them. I wanted to work with both of them in some capacity, but you know, but it didn't happen, of course.
Right. I understand. And so I know it's the early stages of the project that you mentioned, but do you have an idea of the new album as far as when that might be ready?
Well, we're looking at March, April at the latest. We were going to be recording. I wanted to
Okay.
record earlier,
Not too far.
but I just didn't have all the money put together, to be honest with you. Album is written, and I'm excited for it. It's called the Pride album, and the Pride album represents, a lion and its pride, its family, and so that's the idea. And then during Pride Month, we can have a double entendre and have fun with that.
Absolutely. And before we go, could you let everyone know where to find you online?
Yes, you can find me at Aaron, the number 2.me, Aaron2.me, and find me there. Or my Instagram is Aaron L. Myers, my name. My Twitter is Aaron Myers, my name.
All right, guys. And thank you, Aaron, for coming on. I definitely appreciate it. I'll try not to wait this long until we speak again. I think it might have been at
Absolutely.
least a year, but
But
all
it's
right.
fine. I'm glad to see you doing well.
All right, thank you. And hang around behind for backstage in just a second.
Okay.
All right.